Hi everyone, and welcome to your next math lesson. Today we are still in chapter 9, looking at lesson 7, subtracting unlike fractions. Students will be able to subtract unlike fractions. All right, so in the previous lesson and video, we added unlike fractions, and today this is pretty much the exact same thing, except you're subtracting. So just to review, unlike fractions are fractions that have different denominators. And when we have different denominators, it means that we have to do a little bit of work before we can go ahead and just subtract the numerators. We have to make the denominators the same. We have to find a common denominator. So for our first example, let's take 5/12 minus 1/4. Okay? And this could be a real world problem. Maybe we're talking about the length of two things. If the length of an animal is 5/12 of a foot, and the length of a different animal is 1/4 of a foot, and we ask for the difference in their lengths, that would mean that we're subtracting the greater length minus the shorter length. Okay, so that's just a real world application for that. So we are going to follow the exact same 5 steps that we followed when we did this with addition. So like I said, it's the same thing, just going to end up subtracting in the end. So I have 5/12 minus 1/4. Recall that in order to add or subtract unlike fractions, the very first step that we should do is to write the problem or the fractions vertically. And vertically means that we're stacking them up and down. So I'm going to rewrite my problem so that I have 5/12 minus 1/4. And remember that when you're subtracting, the order matters. So the first fraction has to be the one on top. The second fraction has to be on the bottom. All right, our next step in this process, oh, that's a really new orange one. Our next step is to find a common denominator, okay? So we need to find the least common denominator, and we can find the least common denominator by getting the least common multiple of the two denominators. 12 is a denominator, and 4. To find the least common multiple of my denominators, I'm going to count by 12s and count by 4s until I get a multiple in common. So I'm going to start off with a couple of 12s. 12, 24, 36, and now I'm going to go back and do some 4s. 4, 8, 12. Oh, wait a minute. 12 is in both of my multiples. So 12 could be the common denominator, and it is the least common denominator. So I found my common denominator to be 12. So I need to set both fractions equal to 12. Step 3, just like before, is to make equivalent fractions. Okay, and this part can be a little tough for some. So I have 5/12, and I'm keeping my denominator at 12, so I don't have to change my first fraction. Over here, I have 1/4, and I want to change it into 12ths pieces. And I want to know how many 12ths give me 1/4. If I'm just thinking of what that looks like, here is 1/4, and I want to see how many 12ths pieces equal that. So I can use my fraction tiles to figure it out. Here we go. 1/4 is the same amount of space as 3/12. How can I do that without my fraction tiles? Starting at my denominator 4, what do I do to 4 to get to 12? 4 times what equals 12? Aha, 3. So I have to do that to my numerator. The same thing, multiply it by 3. And 1 times 3 equals 3. That's why we got that 1/4 equals 3/12. Step 4. In this case, we need to subtract. Okay, and this goes back a few lessons to where we were adding and subtracting like denominators, meaning that their denominators are the same. So I have 5/12, and I'm subtracting 3 of those 12ths. And you could use your tiles to build that. But if you had 5 of the 12ths pieces and you take away 3 of them, you are left with 2 12ths. Because 5 minus 3 equals 2, and we always keep the same denominator. Okay, if they were both 12, we keep it at 12. Unless, step 5, we have to simplify. Make sure your answer is in simplest form all the time. So our difference was 2 12ths. Can I simplify 2 12ths? Is there a times table that gives me both a 2 and a 12? Yeah, my 2 times tables, they're even. When you have the numerator and denominator even, you can always start by dividing it by 2 if you're unsure. 2 divided by 2 equals 1, and 12 divided by 2 equals 6. Since my numerator is a 1, I know I'm in simplest form, 1/6. So 5/12 minus 1/4 equals 1/6. It equals 1/6 because I changed 1/4 into 3/12 so that I could subtract. And when I subtracted, I got 2/12, and that simplifies down to 1/6. All right, let's do one more example. I'm going to keep my steps the same. I don't want to have to rewrite them over and over. All right. In our next example, we're going to take 4/5 minus 1/2. Okay, and remember, you can always, always, always use fraction tiles to help you understand a problem. So if I have 4/5, okay, here are 4/5, and I want to subtract 1/2. You can see they're not the same color, they're not the same size because they have different denominators. And that's why we cannot just subtract 4 minus 1. It doesn't work that way because we're not subtracting the same thing. Okay? So we need to follow our steps so that we can find a common denominator, and then we can subtract. Step 1 is to stack your fractions. Write your fractions vertically so that we can find our common denominator. Step 2 is to find that least common denominator. How do I do that? I find the least common multiple of my denominators 5 and 2. Count by 2s, count by 5s until you get something in common. 5, 10, 15, 20. Let's do some 2s. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Oh, there we go. 10 is a common multiple. So 10 will be my new denominator, my common denominator. Step 3, I need to actually change both of those fractions this time because neither of them had a 10. So I just have to make them both into tenths. All right. In other words, when I had 4/5 and 1/2, I can use tenths pieces to cover them up. I can make 1/5 into tenths, and I can also make 1/2 into tenths. They both work. So because my fifths and my half can both be made into tenths, that's why it's my common denominator. And then using this can help you make your equivalent fractions. So I can see here that 1/2 gives me how many tenths? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Up here, I can see that 1/5 is 2/10. So I would then have to duplicate that to figure out what 4/5 would equal. So let's do that work. All right, so how do I get from 5 to 10? I times it by 2. Do the same to your numerator. 4 times 2 equals 8. So 4/5 would give us 8 of those tenths pieces. How about 1/2? 2 times what gives me 10? 5. And do the same to your numerator. 1 times 5 equals 5. So 1/2 equals the same amount as 5/10. Now that I have a common denominator, I can subtract 8/10 minus 5/10. And I take 8 minus 5, which equals 3, and keep my same denominator, 10. Now, I circled that a little early, but I knew that that cannot be simplified. So my last step would be to check for simplest form. 3 and 10 are not together in any times table except the ones. So that means it's already in simplest form. All right, remember that this skill takes a lot of practice. It's one of our tougher skills that we do in 5th grade. So keep practicing. Let me know if you have questions, and I'll see you next time. Bye.